off with the crossing the Irawaddy game. Turn one, we see the Japanese forces pushing up on the left flank towards the 1st British dug-in infantry platoon, which are fearless trained Indians. They're well supported by 2 armoured cars with Boys anti-tank rifles and 1 dismounted Boys anti-tank rifle. Japanese open fire with the 57 mils, knocking out the obstacle, but in reply the armoured cars knock out 1 of the Japanese tanks. Further over in the centre, on the 2nd Indian platoon, we see the Japanese pushing forward, having had some problems with the tankettes, getting bogged in, but they've made a skill test, passing that and knocking out the obstacle, and with no anti-armour, the Japanese are pushing on to this 2nd platoon. Meanwhile, over on the far right flank, the Japanese are coming under heavy pressure from the British 25-pounder battery across the river, and that's taken out and destroyed 2 out of the 4 heavy machine guns. The infantry are making good progress, but again came under heavy fire from a heavy machine gun platoon here. Indians again, fearless trained, dug in, supported by Bren carriers, and the Japanese lost a number of the assets moving forward. Native Indian troops, they continue with the Burmese forces to hold on here, supported by 2 other armoured cars, but again there's not much depth here. Further to the rear, the loading continues on the steamer, and the first ferry is about to make underway across the river. As you can see, some further British defensive positions across the river, along with the 25-pounder battery dug in. Slight problem in the centre with the Allies attempting to withdraw, but that's clogged currently with civilians and refugees all trying to make it across the bridge before the Brits blow it. In depth here we have 1 British line infantry platoon holding what's now the damaged railway bridge, and they have a number of dinghies to pull back across the river, and they're supported in depth by some Gurkha forces. So end of round 1, first blood to the Allies, but all to play for. That said, the Japanese are trying to push across on 3 fronts. They've got no artillery support, and they're relying hopefully on the arrival of the very powerful air capability with the RAF nowhere in sight. So here on the Japanese right flank, they push through quite easily, breaking the Burmese native platoon and pushing them back. However, further over on the right hand side, things not proven to be so easy as they try to break in through the barbed wire onto the heavy machine gun platoon. That proved a little bit more difficult, and a number of the units failing skill tests caught up in the barbed wire. We'll see how that one will play out later this morning. Moving now over on to the hard left flank, some challenges here for the Japanese. Keep getting pinned down by this Boys anti-tank rifle, although saying that the 2 armoured cars have been destroyed. So it's swinging back and forwards here as to who is going to take this left flank. The armour not working well for both sides, with the low-level light anti-tank rifle really having big effect, and the Japanese finding it difficult. In the centre, the tankettes start pushing through as the other forces start to break in through the defensive position onto the central Indian infantry platoon. This is probably the weakest the weakest position for the Brits at this stage. As you can see here over the left hand side, lots of Japanese tanks brewing up, lots of armoured cars destroyed, and it's going to be an interesting play as we move into round 3. So the melee here in the centre proving very interesting. Initially the Japanese broke in, did reasonably well, however failed to wipe out the Indian platoon. They being fearless trained, easily passed a motivation test, made a counter-attack, but only made limited inroads into the Japanese, and we're about to see it swing back in the other direction. So again, very much all to play for here as this central platoon fights it out. However, fearless trained Indians against fearless veteran Japanese, this is only going to go 1 or 2 ways, and it's not going to go well. So as expected, it didn't go particularly well. Japanese passed their motivation test, counterattacked, and wiped the remaining elements of the Indian platoon literally off the face of the earth. They're now consolidating on their position and starting to push up with their tankettes. This is going to be quite a challenge for the Brits, because basically it's going to cut off the road and prevent the remainder of the refugees, but also it's likely, given the position, to turn the British flank here with the other Indian platoon, who are about to become surrounded unless they can manage to fall back onto the real platoon. So very challenging here, decision point for the Brits, as literally the centre has just fallen apart. So over on the Japanese right flank, slightly mixed fortunes, where the heavy machine gun platoon of the Indians managed to hold off the Japanese banzai attack and have basically caused enough casualties. They failed the motivation test. The standard is down with the left flank, and we now see the Japanese forces pulling back across the river, and they're in difficulty here. They've got a weapons platoon in support, but they've got no armour, they've got no additional infantry, and the Brits are sitting there pretty snug with 2 armoured cars, 3 of their brain carriers, and a fearless dug-in heavy machine gun platoon equipped with Vickers. So it's going to be pretty difficult for the Japs here on the right flank, and this is one of their main objectives. We got the steamer preparing, we got the ferry, and we got the big ammo dump, all of which are objectives for the Japanese to take. So they're going to have to really think about this one. So event card 1's just been played. That's a major Japanese air attack, and we've got 3 dive bombers. They've gone for a nice juicy target of the steamer, and you can see them starting to dive in on the steamer as she pulls away from the port. Very difficult time, although there are some British 40mm Bofors across the river and some closer personal air defence weapons on the brain carriers. Let's see what they can do as this, well, very critical round for the Brits starts to form up. Here we can see yet again another one of the planes coming in for a run, and that's going to be very difficult for them. And meanwhile, we also got problems in the centre, where the British Indian platoon managed to do a jungle creep and pull back. It's now broken free, but that's left the remainder of the refugee and particularly the military convoy. It's probably going to come under direct attack now, and we can now see some of the vehicles managing to get across the river, and also the ferry is starting to unload on the right flank the first lot of supplies as the Brits start to pull back to the other side of the Irawaddy. Here we are coming into the end of round 3. So as the aircraft dive in on the ship, the Bofors, which were well camouflaged, have engaged. They had 5 hits, but only 1 firepower pass. So that's 1 aircraft down, as the remaining prepare to dive in onto the steamer itself. Here we see the Bofors unmasking and coming into action and engaging the 3 aircraft as they make their pass over the ferry. And here we see one of the dive bombers badly hit and heading back to home. The attack onto the steamer, very fortunate, 1 hit, 2 near hits, but the aircraft now bank away, only armed with guns, probably going to take another run in next turn. Can the Bofors get to them before they inflict 2 more damage points and see that steamer sinking with all the refugees and civilians on board? Here we go, it's all again, turn 4. So Japanese forces continue to push up here on the left flank. The Indians, as you can see, falling back. They take heavy casualties from the ever devastating Japanese knee mortar. Here in the centre, we can see lots of the convoy brewing up as it gets shot to pieces by the Japanese tankettes, as they basically punch through and break right through the middle of the refugee and military convoy, which is still trying to push itself across the river. Elements have now made it to the other side, but it's looking highly unlikely that the back end of this convoy is going to make it. Over on the far left flank, the Japanese are starting to push, try and get around the flank of the Indian platoon. However, unseen to them, sitting in ambush, is one British infantry platoon holding the Allied right flank. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when this gets sprung on the Japanese forces as they start to push and attempt to outflank the Indian platoon in the centre. Here we can see elements of the convoy, mix of military, refugees and essential supplies making it across the river. The back end of that you can see just now crossing the river, but as mentioned before, the military convoy either wiped out or abandoned their vehicles. Moving now across the other flank of the British position, 25 pounders remain well dug in, still unseen by enemy aerial reconnaissance. As mentioned before, the two Bofors had excellent effect on reducing the air attack on the steamer, and the ferry has unloaded the first third of the Allied supplies, and this seems to be going quite well. However, the steamer is trying to push out, but unfortunately the two Japanese aircraft coming back round for a final run. Two more hits is going to see that at the bottom of the Irawaddy. So that's a end of part one. We leave the game in turn 5. It's been an interesting start. Initially, the Japanese found it quite challenging, assaulting across all of the front of the Allied defensive position, primarily because of the defence by the fearless trained Indian platoons. However, once the central platoon was isolated with no armour support and very limited air and artillery, the Japanese quickly broke through and then were able to start turning the British right flank. However, over on the extreme right Japanese flank, it was a very different story. The Indian HMG Vickers platoon effectively wiping out one infantry platoon supported by the 25 pounders as they broke off. In terms of how the game is going in general for objectives, half of the British convoy has managed to make it across the main bridge. The first of the 3 ferry loads of supplies and ammunition has made it across. And the ferry has set sail. She's got 1 hit. She can take 2 more. There's 2 remaining Japanese aircraft, so it's going to be very interesting as we go into turn 6. All to play for. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned for part 2, which hopefully will be up at the back end of this weekend.